I think that getting out of everyone's heads that we're special. It's a cool industry, but we're no different to any other business sector. And we need to be taking more lessons from them and understanding what good business looks like. And that includes getting things in writing, good contracts, good communication.
Welcome back to another episode of the Force of Nature podcast. Today's special guest is Louise Gibson from the Sharefarming Consultants. She came as a recommendation from Mark Benz at Wingman, and I'm so happy that I got to have her on because we had a really awesome chat around share farming and contract milking in New Zealand. Today's episode, we cover the lack of specialised consulting for share milking and contract milking in New Zealand, the legislation around share milking and the fact that there's been no significant updates to this in decades, the mental health and abusive behaviour that is really formulating around share milking and contract milking, and how we can build diverse income streams into our farm systems, and what the future of agriculture holds in terms of opportunity for the next generation. So, without further ado, let's get into it. How are you today, Louise?
I'm good. How are you, Conan?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's a real pleasure to have you on. I've heard a lot about you, and you've come with some recommendations from Benzie up that way and at Wingman. So I just had to have you on.
Benzie always looks after me. Bless him.
Yeah, he's a good man. So Ken, for the listeners, can you introduce yourself and share a bit about your background?
Cool. I'm Louise Gibson. I'm the Managing Director of the Sharefarming Consultants. I have come through the Massey channel through Massey University doing more biological sciences, but also agricultural science and Dairy NZ, then Federated Farmers, and had a bit of experience with both farm systems and then share farming. So I went out on my own about a year and a half ago, and we're out here with the Sharefarming Consultants specialising both in farm systems and then also people share milking and contract milking.
Awesome. So what was the catalyst behind starting the Sharefarming Consultants?
So while I was at Federated Farmers, I would be the one that picked up the phone calls for people looking for advice, specifically relating to share milking and contract milking. And one of the key things is that I could only provide 15 minutes free advice, but a lot of these people needed a consultant that could support them a bit further. It was not legal support they were after. It wasn't accountancy support they needed. They needed someone that understood the ins and outs of share milking and contract milking to provide them kind of the next steps for what they needed to achieve, especially when it came to farm policies and communication with farm owners and share farmers. But I had no one to really pass them on to. There were plenty of consultants out there, but most of them did that more farm systems and were actually beginning to specialise more in the environmental space. But there wasn't really anyone we could point people in the direction of when it came to actually share farming, share milking and contract milking. So I was kind of ready to move on from Federated Farmers and saw an opportunity, and we haven't actually looked back since. It's been pretty hectic ever since we left.
Yeah, it looks like you're getting some great support. Have you found that since you've gone into the space that there is anyone else working in there across the country, or is it still just yourselves?
When it comes to particularly working with contract milkers and share milkers, not really. There are plenty that will work with the farm owners, and then by kind of osmosis will then be working with the share milkers and contract milkers, but there's no one really in that space that will pick up a contract milking or share milking agreement on behalf of the contract milker or share milker, run the numbers, go through the clauses, look at the additional clauses, check the items in the front. Items in the front of the agreement are probably our biggest thing, is that there's typically a bit of an inaccuracy. They're not completed in full. And so it's being the one on behalf of the share milker and contract milker to say, hey, that's not correct. You need to go get this checked. Lawyers are really good at picking up where clauses are unfair or illegal or not in the best interest of their client, but when it comes to those items, they are really agricultural detail, and most lawyers say that you need to actually speak to a consultant about that, but no one was working with contract milkers and share milkers, so that's definitely still a very open space for us. But and I think I probably stood on a few other consultants' toes when it came to the farm owners' end, but I've actually been working alongside quite a few consultants who are the farm systems consultant or the agronomist on the farm, who recognise they're not people, and they've actually been referring on to me, which is really interesting, and it's actually been really cool. Yeah,
that's awesome to see the support from within the industry. That also probably really helps with the growth of your company at the same time.
Yeah, and accountants. I've made a lot of friendships with accountants across the country, and that's been really cool because for them, they get these contract milkers and share milkers through their doors, but As my accountant said to me the other day, he's like, well, a budget's always going to work no matter what. So when you're looking at a piece of paper, it's always going to work. It doesn't, unless someone's looking at it critically that understands that this does not add up to this, they're not going to pick up what's wrong. And so for them, it's actually been really useful for their business too, to have a consultant that can actually go, this isn't going to work, or we need to look at this, or we need to add this provision to make sure the share milker and contract milker is protected.
100%. So just to bring it back quickly, for those that are listening that might not be familiar with the terms contract milker or share milker, can you give us a quick explanation of what they are and how they differ?
So when I'm talking in this context, a contract milker is someone that is paid a dollar value for every kilogram of milk solids that are produced. They have a set of expenses that typically revolve around shed expenses, bikes, and people, so their employees. They run the day-to-day management of the farm, but there is no rules or regulations on how a contract milking rate is set, so there's no laws protecting them. When I'm talking about share milkers in this context, I am probably more talking about herd-owning share milkers. A herd-owning share milker is also known as a 50-50 share milker. They receive 50% of the income. They own the cows, and they also will provide all the labour. They provide a good chunk of machinery, and they share some of the feed costs and nitrogen costs. There is also another group of share milker called the variable order share milker, and it was really, really popular probably up until about 10 years ago, probably actually getting closer to 11 years ago now. And they were a group that received anywhere from 20% up to 39%, probably actually 49% legally, and they would share at that lower end costs when it came to, they would take on all the shed costs, the labour costs, and then they would probably give the rest of the cost to the farm owner. And then as you moved up, you'd begin to start sharing feed and fertiliser costs. That group was a fabulous method, and that was instigated nearly 100 years ago, and there's actually a law protecting them, but they have definitely fallen out of favour when we had that really tumultuous period of milk price, because they were really not financially viable when you began to get down to that bottom end.
And do you think that's people haven't gone back to that just because it is not viable when the milk price does drop down?
Yeah, it's a lot of fear. We are seeing more this year. We had quite a few come across my desk, and it was really exciting. But because we haven't seen it for 11 years, most people have forgotten about the Share Milking Act. And to be fair, the Share Milking Act hasn't had anything really meaningful done to it since the 70s. It had a few changes done about 2011. And most people have forgotten what those were. And so there's some really key things that, because our generation isn't experienced in it, there's been quite a few clauses in there or percentages that are quite risky. And there has been a little bit of a ideology that it should be based on a break-even of $8.50. And we've had to kind of begin to educate and say, no, that is not safe. $8.50 is actually still a very mid-range milk price. We need to start looking at break-even being a lot lower, and having that education with would-be farm owners who are looking at using share milkers again. So yeah, it's definitely been an interesting season, because when milk price goes high, there is this really high motivation for taking on a little bit more risk because the reward is there, but it definitely disappears at the lower milk price range.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at how the milk swings, generally when we have those peaks, they can be quite often be followed by the absolute opposite end.
Yep.
And I guess that's where people get burnt.
Yep. And that was probably where a lot of them coming across my desk. I had quite high anxiety this year. I was like, back in January, we had no idea what was coming. No one was putting out predictions. It was very quiet from the banks, who often will put a bit of a prediction forward. And even now, while we do have a kind of farm gate milk price that does look great, we're still 12 months away from really knowing what the final price will be. So yeah, I think I still would definitely be cautious if you're someone out there that's considering going variable order share milking next season.
Do you think it's still a great opportunity in terms of someone trying to get into that farm ownership or growing from a contract milking position?
Definitely. If you are really good at kind of owning your numbers now at contract milking, so it's not a bad thing to skip contract milking, but you've got to be a really confident, best practice farm operator. You've got to be really across your numbers. You've got to really understand your contract. You've got to have a great accountant. You need to know a lawyer by their first name. And you need to be really a great communicator with your farm owner, because if that milk price was to drop, you need to understand what your either exit plan or your floor is going to be and how you're going to get protected. There are great methodologies out there, but you can't go into it with your eyes closed, because that is probably the biggest issue we probably saw 10 years ago, as everyone saw it as a great opportunity to get to farm ownership, make lots of money. and in reality no one had a backstop.
That's scary when you think about it.
Yeah.
What actually did happen 10 years ago. So if we look at what you've just released in the last 12 months, which is the Contract Milking Experience Survey, the first of its kind in the industry, how have you found the response to that so far?
Actually, mostly really positive. We got a lot of media attention for all the right reasons right at the beginning, and there were definitely a few that quite quick to dismiss it. But the majority weren't surprised. They saw the contents and they said, well, we see this and hear this every single day, especially when it comes to the Parliament. We've had quite a number of MPs that we've been working with since who were waiting for some kind of data to begin to make changes because they knew it was an issue. Some of the negativity has actually come from a place of probably ignorance. And I did an interview where someone was trying to tell me that contract milkers make up 50% of the industry. And I was like, they didn't have any idea of their numbers. They only make up about 15%. Which is actually quite low. Variable order share milkers only make up about 5%, and herd owning share milkers make up about 30%. So herd owning share milking is actually a really big component, which we obviously don't cover in that survey. But if you talk to herd owning share milkers, had that experience as contract milkers themselves, and so they're very aware of it too, and they're still experiencing some of the issues to some extent. But the reality is that most people understood, they recognised that we had an issue, and we recognised that we needed to make some changes.
That's awesome. Are you seeing that the MPs are potentially looking at the legislation around that and changing it, or introducing some because of this?
Yeah, so I was originally told by someone, it's too hard, far too hard, we'll just make changes to the contracts. Having worked on those contracts back when I was with Federated Farmers, I know that no changes actually have been made in 2 years, and that if there were going to be contract changes, they need to be meeting now. So the contracts committee needs to be meeting now. I wouldn't expect to see any contract changes this season. So for the 2026-27 season, there won't be any changes in place. So it's all too slow, realistically. So when it comes to the legislative changes, the MPs that I'm working with have a paper in front of them at the moment, a draft, just to kind of look at what kind of options we have, and they are going to then come back with some other ideas, and then we can actually put forward a more formal paper on what we're going to do next and what that looks like. Problematically, because we've got such a short election cycle, it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly we can do this, but Barbara Kruger is super passionate, and so we're going to give it a go and see which kind of pathway we end up taking. But it feels like there'll be good support from across the House, just because it is people, and I think farming and people together. Yeah,
100%. It's a people problem. So you'd like to think that the majority of the House would support better legislation around this and looking after our primary industry.
Yeah, and so what we're looking at is not only making sure contract milkers are included, but also making sure we're protecting variable order share milkers better, because the current legislation is so old, and also considering how can herd owning share milkers be protected as well, because right now they sit in a bit of a grey space as a contractor. There are changes to the rules of what a contractor is coming, and it would actually be quite detrimental to farm owners if share milkers, contract milkers, or herd owning share milkers, contract milkers, and variable order share milkers were sitting out there as contract milkers still, as contractors still, because it means that they are free to kind of work for multiple farms without any consideration from the farm owner. So from a farm owner's perspective, it really would be beneficial if they were all put under the Share Milking Act.
That's awesome. I'm hoping we'll see some movement in that space in the next few months.
Yeah, fingers crossed. We'll just keep pushing.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at a few of the stats from the report, 43% of people reported abusive behaviour by the farm owners. Just over 72% reported an experience that caused them either mental or financial setbacks. And of these people, 82% said it impacted their families. Almost 40% worried where they would live after. How does these stats line up with what you thought you were going to get back from the survey, and how does it actually make you feel about the current state of the sector?
It was worse than I expected, and to be fair, there will definitely be some respondent bias, but it was definitely worse, and I think we understood there was an issue. It's quite a common thing when I'm trying to work with a share farmer who needs to leave their role because of abusive behaviour primarily, is they're worried about where they're going to live. And not only is this their job they're leaving, they will have no job and nowhere to live. So they have to try and get a rental with no job, which the state of housing in New Zealand anyway is almost impossible to do. So that's probably one of our biggest considerations. but also realizing people stay in these jobs with abusive behavior and may stay for a whole nother season because they're worried they can't get another job, mainly probably because they can't use their current farm owner as a reference. And yeah, they put up with it day in, day out. And I see that depression in people where they're just dragging themselves out of bed each day, going through the motions and going back to bed. But it was pretty sad to see it in such big numbers, but not surprising based on what I see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the numbers are quite surprising, and I guess even if there is some bias in there, I don't think it's going to drastically change those numbers much, is it?
No, and this is the thing, is that even if there is the respondent bias, the numbers that we got, the actual numbers of individuals that responded, which is really high in terms of proportion of numbers of current contract milkers, it's too many people as individuals experiencing that. And it does kind of give us a bit of a wake-up call, is that we actually need to make some big changes.
Yeah, totally agree. And like you say, you do hear about these situations where people just feel like they're locked into the position that they're at because they can't feel like they move anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's the big difference between contract milkers, particularly as a contractor. Say you're a builder and you show up and Mr. and Mrs. Smith berate the living daylights out of you. There is nothing stopping you from walking away. You don't lose your house. You find another bit of work next week. There is nothing stopping you from walking away from that situation. As a contract milker, especially if you're a parent and you've got children in a school and you're miles out of town, that school is their stability. You going to work every day is the only way you're making any money, and chances are you're not making that much. You're probably just making enough to scrape by. You've got a roof over your head, but the mental impact, and we see that it impacted so many families. It's really hard to kind of reflect, actually, is that stability, that so-called stability, actually good for my children? And it feels like it at the time, but a lot of people then exit and go, oh my God, that was just horrendous. And what kind of trauma has that done? We speak to a lot of adults now whose parents went through it in the 80s and 90s, and they go, like, all I remember is mum and dad just being so upset and angry all the time and depressed, and they just would take to their bed, and that kind of trauma. So it's something that's happened for generations. There's probably no real support for them from a legal perspective. So back 80 years ago, there was a provision in the Act for variable to share milkers that the Labour Inspectorate would come in and deal with the problem. Then that was the Agricultural Workers Act. There was a body that would then step in. However, that was repealed in the late 80s, early 90s in multiple stages. And that provision in the Share Milking Act was never replaced. And so now you have to have the financial abilities, like financial ability and financial means, to be able to go and get a good lawyer and know of a good lawyer to help extract you. But they are only going to be able to do the legal side. They're not going to be able to find you a house. They're not going to be able to provide you some kind of stability and a new job. So that is a big kind of gap in our sector.
It's a huge barrier. Is that something that the MPs are also looking at?
Yeah. So there's some key things we're looking at. Yeah. So one is the ability for a labour inspectorate to come and deal with it. Like same kind of what we're seeing right now with the migrant labour workforce that we've got. We've now got a task force that's in the Labour Department that is designed to step in and come and deal with that situation when there's exploitation. What's happening, we are seeing that exploitation in contract milkers and share milkers. And so what would be ideal is if the Labour Department could then also take on that group, which would be a big budget line, but it'd be really, really crucial. The next kind of part of that is also when there's withheld money. If you today were to withhold money from your employee, that's actually a criminal offence. It's no longer something that would have to be a civil offence. And so the whole kind of concept would be that instead of you having to then go and get a lawyer to litigate to get that money, it would be investigated entirely differently. And so we're looking at that provision being brought across to share milkers and contract milkers as well.
That's awesome, because you do hear those stories of money being held, and it just really elevates that level of stress that's already there that you've spoken about.
Yeah. And it's exploitation at the end of the day. If you were doing that to an employee and expecting them to show up to work at 4 o'clock in the morning and milk 1,000 cows and do it with a smile on their face, that is considered modern day slavery. So it would be very interesting to see how we can actually get these provisions written, and especially around how we can provide protections for abusive behaviour on both sides. And this is what everyone tries to remind me, share milkers and contract milkers are abusive to their farm owners. I'm like, I don't agree with it. I definitely find that problematic. However, there's no provisions for either party to be protected. So, that's kind of some of the things we're hoping to get included in these legislation changes.
So would that also include that protection towards the farm owner as well?
Definitely, yeah. And I think the real key thing is that the way we write this is that it is about both parties, particularly when we see these contractor changes coming in, is that they need protections too. I have seen it where a contract milker has gone out and gotten 4 contract milking jobs, and the farm owner had no idea in any case. And the contract milker managed to kind of hide it for 2 or 3 months. But there was like real weird readings on the halo, so it could tell when the milk temperature changed. And you get a weird reading that there was milk going into the vat at like 1 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, eventually they began to work out that this contract milker must be working for someone else. Then they kind of realised who they were working for, and then they worked out there was more people that this contract milker had convinced that he to take a job. And as a result, their farms got absolutely run into the ground. I've got no problem with contract milkers and share milkers having multiple jobs. However, it needs to be done honestly. It needs to be done with a plan, and the farm owner needs to be able to give their permission that they're comfortable with that, because it's a huge job no matter what. So there's these clauses there's these provisions in the new contractor laws that say these people need to be allowed to subcontract, which is all good. However, you can't withhold that permission, and I think as a farm owner they should be given that opportunity as well. It's their asset and they need to be able to protect it.
100%, and just good communication goes so far with any sort of relationship in business. Like it's a simple thing to of respect, I admit.
Yeah. It sounds simple, Conan, but people are still working on that.
I have to say, it's a constant work on for me as well. But just being aware is probably the first step. Yeah, awareness that you're not a good communicator. Most of the farm owners I actually work with know they're not good communicators, but they know they're not good communicators, which means I can help them. It makes my job a lot easier. Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the most common pitfalls you see in some of the arrangements that you've been dealing with?
So probably the number one thing is contract milkers and share milkers being way too trusting. They will believe whatever the farm owner says verbally, but they don't know how to follow up and get that in writing. I've seen it really recently where there was an agreement on the sale of some cows. So the share milker was buying the cows of the farm owner. The price was they thought was agreed, and then that price got changed on them at the 11th hour, and it was purely down to a miscommunication, but no one had gotten it in writing, no one had put it in an email, and that would have saved so much stress if that had been put in an email. The next probably is expectations are too high, with a lack of understanding of the science behind how milk is made. It's actually really surprising and quite shocking that I roll up to a farm and the farm owner might still be talking about rotation length, and how many days they need to be doing in their rotation and plugging in some silage maybe, but not too much silage. But they don't quite understand what that means. So they don't understand how many kilos of dry matter the cows are actually receiving. They don't understand anything about pre-grazing or post-grazing residuals. And the contract milker and share milker are trying to get through to them. I'm actually short on grass. I need to be adding supplement to this rate. Rotation length is still useful, but it's no longer the kind of latest and greatest science. It probably went out when I was, or long before I was even at high school. So the kind of lack of understanding of how milk is made, and then so what happens then is these farm owners have these great expectation that the share milker or contract milker is going to make 10,000 kilograms of milk solids more than they did last year, and then provide no provisions when it comes to more feed input for them to achieve that, or how much cows should be receiving each day. That's a really, really big pitfall, and that's probably the number one thing I see falling out so far. And the next is probably understanding how cost structures are impacting each other. So each party has their own costs, and there is often expectations where the share milker expects the farm owner to pay for something, the farm owner expects the share milker to pay for something, not understanding the other costs they are carrying just to keep their businesses viable. And that is a communication thing. And this is where those monthly meetings and being really honest about your numbers to each other can have a really big impact, because those expectations fall away, and it makes the whole farming situation a lot easier and the whole relationship better.
Yeah, those are really 3 really big points, which are just really crucial to dairy farming. And the fact that you're still seeing them kind of across the board is, I guess, somewhat surprising, because you'd think the consultant would be the one in there kind of driving those meetings to make sure things are lining up. But as you're saying, maybe the soft communication skills aren't there between the group.
Yep. And I think there's this recognition, there's this kind of generational difference of, well, that's how I did it in my day. However, their peak milk production in 1985 was definitely not what they're expecting the new contract milker or share milker to achieve. And so that from that perspective, that kind of, they don't quite connect the dots if they haven't in the last 30 years connected the dots that, hold on, there is a whole new science when it comes to milk production. And they are the ones, if you're interviewing with a farm owner, do talk about what their expectations of pasture management are. The ones that go, oh no, however you want to do it, are who you want to work for. Or if they're talking about kilograms of dry matter per cow, because they get it. If they're still talking about rotation length, do consider, is this going to be the best relationship for you?
Do you see differences between areas like Waikato, Taranaki and Canterbury or Southland in terms of like the understanding around that grazing management?
Yeah, so the rotation length is very much a Waikato problem, and it's definitely a thing. I still see probably Taranaki is also lumped in there. Canterbury is an interesting one. There is a mixture of really understands kilograms of dry matter per hectare or per cow, and then there's a group that think that cows can make milk at a thin air, and that expectation never works. I've seen some contract milkers get really screwed in that situation. And they might do a really, really good job one year because they are super onto every single blade of grass, and then the goalpost gets shifted. And there's a company that goes out there and actually will cut the contract milking rate because they did so well, then therefore they can make more milk, so they can make up that money. But they'll cut back the contract milking rate instead of rewarding them by letting them keep that fabulous income that they have worked really hard to achieve. So yeah, that exists, and that's very much a Canterbury problem. Southland, I find Southland actually really practical and pragmatic. They deal with some pretty extreme weather events, and they have very much probably had to become very good at understanding kilograms of dry matter per cow.
Yeah, I mean, Southland dairy farming must be one of the hardest places to do it in the country. Just the last few years just seem diabolical in terms of being able to manage grass or even grow it in the first place, and then to manage your stock and keep them happy. Hats off to them. Hats
off to them, honestly, and having to... I used to work for, when I was at Dairy NZ, one of my jobs was down at Balclutha, and we had a winter crop trial, and it was hard. Oh my God, grazing kale is hard work. Hats off to them. They do amazing, and they have to deal with some extreme weather unpredictability, and it's either too dry and your crops fail, it's too wet and your crops fail. And you have to come up with some kind of ability to magic grass out of nothing. So I find they're really practical and pragmatic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what on the other side of things, what do you see that the successful guys are doing in terms of contracts and then actually applying it to a farm?
Yeah, so the successful ones really know their contracts. They've read them inside and out, or they've gone and sought help to learning them inside and out. They understand the science of farming. So they're not just doing what they learnt in their first job. They understand kilograms of dry matter, they understand nitrogen, they understand feed inputs, they understand cost. Particularly my most successful contract milkers are the ones that understand what it's going to cost the farm owner. So when they come to the farm owner and say, I would like to get a unit load of PKE, it's going to cost this much. However, I would like to see this milk production response from it. They're going to have far more success in both their farm owner's business and their business as a result. So they're my real successful contract milkers. They also understand the contract milking budget calculator that was done by Dairy NZ. And they're the ones that understand the premium. They also get everything in writing. And they are not pushovers. They are not going to let someone have abusive behaviour toward them. They're not going to let anyone take them for a ride. So they're overall excellent business people as well as excellent dairy farmers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's this sort of attitude towards those guys that are really good at the business side of farming that they almost get considered to not be farmers. Which is an interesting take.
Yeah. I know, I agree. And I have no judgment if you're in the shed or not. I do not mind. We've been working with the bank on some projects, and the number one thing they see, actually our accountant said the same thing, is that those that are going to reach farm ownership, it's not the farm income that you make as a contract milker or a share milker that's going to get you to farm ownership. Those days are gone. We really need to start looking at how diverse you are across multiple businesses and how can you be making more income or more, building your equity. So having rental properties, having Airbnb properties, having a contracting business, driving tractors on the weekends for other companies. How are you having multiple streams of income so that you are building yourself up to farm ownership, because it's no longer in that contract milker, share milker space. And they're my guys who are killing it and getting to the farm ownership level. And they may not even be in the shed any longer, but they're very business orientated.
With that in mind, do you still think it, in terms of the pathway to farming or farm ownership in New Zealand, do you think that contract milking, share milking is still one of the greatest pathways because you can leverage it to do those other businesses at the same time? Yeah,
as long as you're diverse. So it's no longer viable if you're just thinking contract milking will get you to share milking and share milking will get you to farm ownership. No way. You are not building enough equity. You're paying way too much interest. When you're in contract milking, you're not making much of a premium. The reality is there is probably the majority, 1/3 aren't making a premium at all, and a third are basically going backwards. The other 2/3, about a third, will be making a premium of maybe $20,000, which is not much. And then there's another kind of third that are making a good premium. However, it's how they then invest it, and then also managing your tax. So this is where having the ability to invest. So I went to a presentation with Craig's Investments not long ago, and they had some really cool advice. So it's definitely worth catching up with an investment broker like that. But also considering how can you get into your first property and build some equity so that when it comes to buying your cows for the first time, you actually got a better interest rate because there's a better security than just the cows, because cows can die. And then when you're at the share milking level, what are you doing to build your equity beyond just cows? If you're really serious about getting to farm ownership, because it's not going to be an easy pathway just getting from share milking to farm ownership.
100%. I guess it's that thing of having that board of advisors and actually thinking like if you need someone to help give you advice on that money so you can grow to get to that farm ownership level.
Definitely talk to people, be really open, have great accountants. Talk to advisors like ourselves, talk to other farm advisors because they're really passionate about young people getting to farm ownership. Build a relationship with your bank as well. It's really hard to do at contract milking and share milking level, but there is still an appetite for banks to have these young people to talk to. And I actually have a really good relationship with a local rural real estate agent, and I pick his brains all the time as well. So I think that, it's no longer what it was, but it doesn't mean that dream is dead. It just means we've got to do it differently.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we will see some interesting funding models coming to the work foray in the future, especially with this big wave of succession that's supposedly coming in the next 10 years, which is going to be very, very interesting. And potentially a lot more opportunity around share farming and contract milking for those that are ready to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and so some really interesting succession models when we talk about that kind of side of things is that equity partnership and how you structure your equity partnership. So I've seen it go well and seen it go badly, but one of the ways it goes well is if you are part of the equity partnership company and then you have your own contract milking company that contracts back to the equity partnership, and as long as you set that contract milking rate up well. Some people still get on a really crappy contract milking rate and that doesn't work. So it's making sure you get really good advice about that kind of stuff. But it's definitely doable. There's a lot of appetite out there because the succession issue is a major. And there are not enough people out there ready to buy farms.
Oh, absolutely. So if we look at agreements going into the future, how can landowners and farm businesses actually structure these so there's more of a mutual benefit? Like, is that communication piece?
It's being really open, So when it comes to your contract milking and share milking agreements, there is the items at the front. If you can provide all that information and more, and then sit with the contract milker or share milker that you're going to be working with and sit down and talk about, okay, how are we going to have a successful season next year? So you sign up everything, you sit down in March and you go, okay, how are we going to do this? Our goal is this. We've got this much feed. Is that doable? How are we going to run mating? How are we going to run calving? What do you do in these different circumstances around there's not enough winter growth, there's not enough spring growth? What do we do? How do we communicate? And having those plans in place, and then making sure you invest in a farm policy. Farm policies are gold because they give you something to fall back on. That everything in there is written about how tidy the farm is, how you feed cows, how you manage farm maintenance, those expectations, and the expectations on communication. So it's one of those things that gives the contract milker, remember when you have your first day at a new job, everything's really overwhelming. As a contract milker or a share milker, it's incredibly overwhelming because not only do you have to figure everything out, you've got to figure out a whole new farm for yourself. And having that farm policy at least means you're not trying to read the farm owner's mind. So yeah, I again recommend that as well. And make sure you give that contract milker and or share milker as much time as possible to do their due diligence, so they don't feel pressured to sign something they're not comfortable with.
All very good tips. I think, yeah, it's such an interesting space to work in because there is a lot of money at stake, and I guess people think that it's a kind of a cash cow.
Yeah.
But ultimately, as you say, you see that a lot of people get burnt and they just go back to, say, a farm manager's role because it was too stressful and they jumped into something that was too easy.
Yep, and there's nothing wrong with being a farm manager. Oh my gosh, I think so many people feel like they're going backwards, but you're on wages and you get weekends off, you can take holidays, and you can be banking not just KiwiSaver, but a good chunk of your income and be building a nest egg to buy a rental property, and you've got an income that's guaranteed that the bank will look at you seriously. So there is nothing wrong with being a farm manager, and even if you were really still interested in being a farm owner, there is still nothing wrong with actually leaving contract milking and share milking for 10 years, getting another job in town, building up your equity, and then moving to farm ownership a bit later.
100%. So I usually wrap up my podcast with a couple of quick fire questions for all my guests. The first one is, what's one thing that you would change about the agricultural industry?
Gosh, I don't know. I think that getting out of everyone's heads that we're special. It's a cool industry, but we're no different to any other business sector, and we need to be taking more lessons from them and understanding what good business looks like. And that includes getting things in writing, good contracts, good communication.
Totally agree. I think we can learn a lot from other businesses. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And some of the stuff that I pull in is what I've learned in other business courses that are way outside our farming, but the principles apply to good business and farming too. Yep,
definitely.
The next one is, looking back at your younger self, what's one piece of advice you'd give?
Probably trust the process. I am someone that's all in, and I am pretty intense, but I think I had a few years of just having to sit back and be in the background and just learn and absorb, and it always feels like you're not going anywhere, but in reality you're probably learning a lot and developing a lot. And I think I just tell myself, trust the process, and just kind of go with the flow a bit more.
Love it. That's beautiful. What's something that is exciting at you at the moment?
Oh gosh. That's hard. I think that New Zealand is at a really cool place opportunity-wise. I think we've got some really clever, talented people coming through share milking and contract milking that are going to bring some really cool change to how we farm, not just from a productivity perspective, but also from an environmental and animal welfare perspective. We're really changing what we accept, and I can't wait to see this new generation hit farm ownership, because I think we're going to see some really cool changes in how we view ourselves as a sector.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is such an exciting time to be in the farming space, and what is a potential quite a big change coming on over the next few years.
And to kind of add to that, I am a big advocate for technology. I love products like Halter. I think I was some yarn on one of the Facebook pages the other day about we're losing the art of farming. People won't know how to farm, and I'm like, well, yeah, but you also don't know how they used to do things in the 70s. You definitely wouldn't have agreed with that lack of technology. So how is this any different? And I think there is a really great gain to be made in how we farm more intelligently and bring more science into our farm systems, which I think is really cool. Very exciting.
100%. And I think technology is just there to enhance what we're doing in the farming.
Yep.
And guys that do have Halter are saying that sometimes they're actually in the paddock more, like 3 times more a day than they would be if they had to get the cows in. So they're actually spending more time observing cows, looking at the grass, because they've got that freedom of time. So it's the opposite of what people are thinking.
Yeah, and they're always watching them too. It's really interesting what they're observing. So I definitely agree.
And what is a force of nature to you?
Farming wahine. Well, they are my absolute idols. Women that run farm businesses are strong. They are independent. They keep the whole show running on 3 hours sleep and 4 cups of coffee. It's so cool being part of a generation of women who are the leader in their businesses. And even when it's in a couple situation, the stuff that women are bringing to the table at the moment when it comes to the actual business management, the accounting, and the actual people management, even if they're not in the shed themselves, is incredible. And they do it with a bunch of kids behind them. They are an absolute force to be reckoned with. And I actually think they're a force of nature.
I agree. And like they are quite a lot of our farming leaders at the moment, and the ones that are building into being the leaders are women in this space. And like you say, they're incredible businesswomen. Like, they're really driving it.
And how they do it in so little sleep, I don't understand. They're amazing. I'm in awe of them every day.
Absolutely. And finally, if the listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, so we've got our website, thesharefarmingconsultants.com, but I've been a bit slack on socials the last couple of months because it's just been so busy, but we're on Instagram at the Sharefarming Consultants, and on Facebook. Our Facebook page isn't too active because Facebook is a bit difficult to manage, but our Instagram is definitely the best place to find us.
Well, thank you very much for coming on today and sharing more about what you guys do. It's been awesome to chat about this very interesting topic and the work that you do. It's much needed, as I think everyone's probably figured out from this podcast.
Thank you so much, Conan. I love talking about this stuff, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.